our podcast about paranormal, the murders, the odd, the unusual. I'm glad to have you listening again. This is episode 5. I hope everybody's had a good week. I'm recording this, it's a Friday night after a very long, boring day at work. I'm a travel agent by day, so I'm sure you can imagine that my work day is not so fun lately with everything going on. But someday it will turn around, so something to look forward to. Oh, that's what I wanted to talk about, just quickly. If anybody listening has a drive-in movie theater near them, and they're actually open and showing movies, I totally encourage you to go. Last Friday night, we decided it was finally time to go out and do something other than sit in the house, and we ended up at a drive-in, not far from the house, and they can't show new movies because regular movie theaters aren't open, so apparently it's just not fair. So they're showing older movies. And we saw Scream, which I've probably seen 1,000 times, but never at the drive-in. So the movie was fine, but it was just the experience. My wife has only been to one other movie at a drive-in in her life not that long ago, and I think she said she saw Clueless, so we had to have a better experience than Clueless at the movie theater. Not hating on it, just a different movie. So that was fun, something different to do, and if one good thing comes of this virus and pandemic-y and everything that is closed is it brings life back to drive-ins, that would probably be a good positive. So very recommend it. If it's something that's by you, go. Even if you're in hot Florida, as long as you don't have a diesel truck, roll up the windows, turn on the air conditioning, and enjoy the movie. So I highly recommend. So tonight I thought I would tell you a super creepy story. So I'm going to give a warning. Some of the information is a bit graphic, so maybe it's not for all ears, just to let you know prior to starting it. So if I said the name Ed Gein, would you know who I was talking about? Maybe some of you do, but I don't think a lot of people might know who he is. But if I asked you if you knew movies like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and House of a Thousand Corpses and Silence of the Lambs, I bet 99% of you would raise your hands and tell me I have seen at least one or all, or I've seen them multiple times. What you may not know, and you're going to know after tonight, is Ed Gein is the inspiration for those movies or those characters. It's when I watch a crazy, creepy, scary horror movie that's actually good, I always got to wonder, is it your sick, twisted mind that came up with it, or did something happen somewhere along the line that gave somebody an idea to create these horrific horror characters? In this case, that was Ed Gein. He gave the ideas and the basis for some of the more popular, horrific, sadistic horror movies. So let's start. He was born Edward Theodore Gein, August 27th, 1906. He was born in Wisconsin and later became known as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul. So the way his life started, like I said, he was born in Wisconsin. He was the second son of George and Augusta Gein. George and Augusta had a very terrible marriage. George was an alcoholic, and Augusta was a extreme religious crazy person. She said the way she was her way was correct, but more of the as I say, not as I do methodology. She would pretty much belittle anyone. She hated her husband, so she'd belittle him. She'd belittle her children. But her husband, George, he did do odd jobs and whatnot, to try and support his family. But being an alcoholic, it was probably hard to hold a job. So Augusta, they lived on a farm in Wisconsin, and it was very isolated, which was perfect for her. She wanted to keep her family isolated, especially her children. The only things they would really go and do outside the family farm was go to school. Her sons could only go to school. They couldn't have any friends. Didn't do anything other than chores. She would basically preach her religious views about sin and immorality about the world around them to her children constantly. In her mind, things such as drinking was evil, and women, except for her, of course, were promiscuous and workers of the devil. So basically, she didn't want her children to ever get married, ever meet anyone. Everyone was a horror. Basically, their routine in the morning was to read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, which focused around things such as murder and death. So lots of dark and grim in the household at all times. Edward, he was a shy kid, kind of awkward, they described him, he'd have weird fidgety movements. He would sit in the corner and laugh at himself. Didn't have a lot of friends, kind of really kept to himself. However, in April of 1940, George did die. He had a heart attack, probably brought on from the drinking. So the boys had to go out and do odd jobs, kind of like their dad did, to try and help offset the expenses that they were losing. Edward's brother, I believe his name was Henry, was more like the dad, as in he was a handyman. He could go to the neighbors and fix things and get paid. Edward, however, he was more soft, let's say. He was not a man's man type of kid. So he would do babysitting. They found that he connected better with children on a child's level than he ever did with any adult, regardless of how old he was. So even as an adult, he was more comfortable as a babysitter than he was ever as holding any kind of adult-type job. In May of 1944, the boys had been on the farm and they were burning brush, as you do, and the fire gets out of control. The fire department has to come, and things get a little chaotic. The fire department gets it put out, and only Edward comes back to the house. So Edward calls the police and says, listen, the fire department was here, we just had a brush fire, and my brother is missing. So the police now come, and Edward is actually able to take the police right to the spot to find his brother face down, dead, in the field. At the time, because of the fire and what was going on, they kind of ruled the death as an accident, regardless of anything they saw in his body. Now, I'm not saying like his throat was sliced or anything like that, but he did have bruises on his head that would maybe in this day and age would have been more alarming, but they ruled it as it was an accident, something to do with the fire, even though there were no burns on his body. Later, many years later, they ended up doing a autopsy, and they actually figured out that Henry had died of asphyxiation, that he was strangled to death. And again, it kind of just went to the wayside. Nothing ever came of it. Even though they had ideas of what could have happened, they still let it go. Now, in December of 1945, Augusta has died. She suffered basically 2 major strokes, and this pretty much destroys Edward. It was said that he lost his best friend and his one true love. He was very, regardless of how insane or abusive his mother actually was to him, he was totally enthralled with her. He loved her unconditionally. She could have done anything to him. He just, that was his light. That was his world. So he was distraught. And basically that was the start of the downfall for Edward. He was an adult, at this time, obviously, and he just couldn't even take being able to look at her bedroom or the rooms that she would have been in the house. So he actually closed up the upstairs where she would have been, a downstairs parlor, a living room, and he made it so in this farmhouse that he lived in one room, and then there was the kitchen and the bathroom. And that was it. Everything else he left as if she had just walked away from it. Everything was pristine. The rest of the house where he was living that he kept open, started to fall apart, but the rooms that were hers were perfect. So this is where we're gonna enter the world of a little nutty, and where you're actually gonna see the connection to the movies I had mentioned. Now, I know you're thinking when I mentioned those types of movies, they're similar, they're horror movies, but they don't walk the exact same line, so how could one person truly be the inspiration for these very different characters? And I'll point it out to you, but I'm sure as I'm reading, you're actually going to see where each character developed from. Kind of interesting, kind of creepy. November 16th of 1957, there was a hardware store, and it was owned by a woman named Bernice. Of course, small town Wisconsin, probably everybody knows everybody, small little hardware store. Unfortunately, she disappears and is gone for an entire day. Some people kind of didn't think anything of it because apparently it was the hunting season and hardware store, she's a hunter, you know, maybe she's out hunting, something like that. So they let the day go by. And Bernice's son is actually the deputy, one of the deputies in the town. So he decides, you know what? My mother didn't tell me she was going hunting. Something seems a little off. So he decides to go to the store. When he walks in, he sees the register is open, but nothing is taken. He sees there are blood stains on the floor. So, of course, being a police officer, this is incredibly alarming. So he looks at, the sales receipt. Let's find out who the last person in the store was. Let's question them, and maybe we can start to build an idea of where his mom disappeared to. So looking at the sales receipt, he sees that Ed Gein was the very last customer. That was the last sales receipt written out. He purchased a gallon of antifreeze. So he decides to call, the sheriff's office and explain, listen, this is what's going on. This is who we need to talk to. This is the last person in the store that I'm aware of that had contact with Bernice. Maybe he can give us some information. So they decide to go to the farm and talk to Ed and figure out, just ask some basic information. However, what they stumble across is truly what nightmares are made out of. When they walk into this shed that's on the property, they find Bernice's body, decapitated and hanging upside down. Her torso is dressed out. For anyone who does not hunt, such as myself, I had to look it up. Basically, that means your internal organs have been removed. Ugh. They see that she was shot with a .22 caliber rifle, and everything that the decapitation, the being filleted, happened after she died. So at least she wasn't hung and sliced and diced alive. So there's some silver lining to that horrific thing. So of course this is, they're like, oh my God, here she is. Obviously, we now need to go in the house. We need to find Ed. They radio back to the police station. I guess at that point they realize Ed isn't there. So they let the other sheriffs know, listen, he's not here. We found her body. He's a murderer. Be on the lookout. They actually find him in a grocery store in town, and they do arrest him. At that point, they decide we're going in the house and we're going to search and see what we can find. If it was me and walked in this house, I would walk right back out. I can deal with some horror and gore, but I probably would throw up. In fact, reading this gives me the heebie-jeebies. So the first thing they found was whole human bones and bone fragments. They find a wastebasket made of human skin. He has skulls on his bedposts. So 4 skulls on 4 bedposts. He has bowls in the kitchen of human skulls. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I said that wrong. He actually has human skulls made into bowls. There was a woman named Mary Hogan. I believe she was a tavern owner. They found her skull in a box and a mask made of her face. They then find Bernice's head in a sack. They find Bernice's heart in a bag by the stove. They find 9 vulvas in a shoebox. And if you don't know what that is, you could look it up. This one is super special. They find a belt made of female nipples. Listen, I lived through the 80s. I've seen all kinds of belts. I don't think I can handle a belt made of nipples. They found 4 noses. A pair of lips on a window shade drawstring. A lampshade made from skin of a human face. And this one, fingernails from female hands. A bag full of fingernails. Oh, God, it makes me want to throw up. One of the things they had said when his mother died was he then wanted to become her. He was very feminine, and he decided once his mother died that maybe he should get a sex change, and he could become his mother. because he felt that connected to her. So he, in a sense, was doing it on his own. One of the things or a couple of the things they found was a corset made of a female torso skin, and it was from the shoulders to the waist. They also found leggings made of female human skin. So if you ever saw Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill, when, put the lotion on the skin, girl is in the hole, and he's trying on his skin suit to be a woman, yeah, that's where the idea came from, because that's what Ed Gein was doing. He was becoming a woman. So after all this horror is basically, they took photos of everything and discreetly got rid of it because it was just horrific. So the police question him, and they ask him, who are these people? Where did you kill all these people? Like, where did you get it all? And his response pretty much is he had visited 2 or 3 local cemeteries. I don't remember which one it was. And he would exhume their bodies. But he claims he would be in like a daze, like maybe like a zombie state. And he would take the bodies. And the one thing that kind of was interesting, if he being in this daze, is the only people he would take had similar features to his mother. So middle-aged, dark-haired women that reminded him enough of his mother. So you could see he was taking them so he could build the woman suit so he would look like his mother, which, again, we have the woman suit like Buffalo Bill. We have the obsession with the mother from Norman Bates. And we have all the skin furniture like Leatherface. They said he even had the apron that, if you ever saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he had the mask that was made of somebody's face. And then he had this apron made of skin. Well, they also said they found an apron made of skin. So he, now you see with all this evidence where these stories for these movies came from. He did say that if he was in the cemetery and he came out of the daze, he would just leave empty-handed. But if he was in the daze, he would dig up the graves, and it would usually be fresh burials. When asked, he did claim that he did not have sex with any of the dead bodies because they smelled too bad. So it really makes you wonder 2 things. I wondered. One, did he eat them at all? Was he a cannibal? Personally, if you are using and dissecting an entire person the way you are, I'd imagine you're eating them as well. And if they didn't have a stench, maybe he got someone, forgive me, there's no good way to say this, but maybe if they were fresh and they didn't smell, did he have a relations with them? If you were that in love with the idea of your mother and these female corpses look like your mother, I 100% in my mind think that he had this relationship until they got gross, and then he would dissect them. So, of course, he's going to go on trial. They know he murdered at least 2 people. So in November of 1957, which really, if we think about it, is only 61 years ago, that's not that long ago for something so horrific that it really blows your mind. He was arraigned on 1 count of first-degree murder and pled not guilty by reason of insanity. I know, shocker. So a doctor diagnoses him with schizophrenia and basically says he is mentally incapable of standing trial. He's not going to understand. So he goes to a state hospital, and I'm not quite sure what they do with him there, but some years later, he's reevaluated by doctors in 1968, and is found that he can comprehend and he can finally stand trial. I mean, 9 years later, you're now finally going to stand trial? Okay. There was no jury. Basically, it was the lawyers and the judge. He testified for himself, and when it came to the murder of Bernice, he said it was not intentional. It was truly accidental. He got scared as to why he took her, and then, of course, he didn't want her to go to waste. He was in the hardware store, and he was looking at rifles, and she was behind the counter, and he was putting a bullet in the gun, and it went off and shot her. He didn't actually aim at her. Now, I've been to many stores. and have never thought that, let me hold this gun and put a bullet in it. But maybe back then that was normal. I don't know. That's, to me, it sounds weird. I don't know. I don't know if it was put in his head to say, I really don't know. So, lo and behold, he's found guilty. But he is then found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent back to a mental hospital for the criminally insane. And that is basically where he spent the rest of his life. He died in July 26th of 1984 of lung cancer, or a complication of lung cancer. That creeps me out, knowing that this crazy person even lived when I lived. Not that he was doing anything to anyone, but in 1984 I existed, so did he. So that's pretty much his story. I saw pictures of him, and I will definitely put the pictures of him on Instagram. And if you just look at him, even to his eyes, he's just not right. He looks crazy. He looks like when he's looking at you, he's looking at a meal. I mean, maybe I think that way, or I can say it that way because I know what he did, but he truly looks batshit crazy. And if I ever came across him, he'd freak me the fuck out. I think it's amazing that one person and their crimes truly inspired these movies that are iconic if you're a horror fan. I mean, everybody knows who they are. Even the Rob Zombie House of a Thousand Corpses and the sequel, Devil's Rejects. That movie is they're just twisted. Now, if you know anything about Rob Zombie, he's totally twisted. So I could see him thinking of it. But to know that a human being walked this earth, just like the rest of us, who did these horrific acts that you think only Hollywood could come up with, is unbelievable to me. And I always wondered when I see these horror movies like this, and I think to myself, here's a good one, Saw. I've seen all of them, and the best way to watch Saw is to watch them all in a row, because they kind of merge into each other, and then the movie makes more sense. But I always felt like either you're one sick, sadistic bastard who could come up with this idea, or you're going to give this idea to some sick, sadistic bastard who's going to create a funhouse of horror and mutilate people. As far as I know, there have not been any Saw murders, but hopefully no one listening to this gets any ideas. Just kidding. So I'm going to let you mull all that over. That's a hard one to envision in your head. Like I said, I will put on Instagram some pictures of him, the house. I will tell you a lot of the things he made, the furniture he made, of the skin. The pictures are out there. I mean, we live in the day and age that everything is at our fingertips. If I can find pictures that aren't as horrific to look at, I will add them to the Instagram as well, so you can kind of get an idea. Maybe one, maybe two, but those items kind of walk a fine line, so I'm not sure where I'll go with that. But definitely check them out. As always, thanks so much for listening. I welcome your feedback. Again, any suggestions, anything you want to hear, questions, just want to say hi. Shoot me an email, the Dark Cellar podcast @gmail.com. Instagram, you'll find me at the Dark Cellar podcast. And till next time, I hope everyone has a fantastic day and stays safe and well. And till we meet again, have a good time.